So I did want to bring up Omni because a lot of us here in the marketplaces world, we're aware of it and we're kind of following Omni. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about maybe some of the kind of learnings and lessons from Omni that have kind of helped you now with Primer.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Omni, what we were trying to do, the sort of thesis was everyone owns lots of stuff. And in cities, you have a very high multiple of the number of things that could ever be needed to be in use owned by people in that city. So for example, in San Francisco, there might be 30,000 tents or something, 25,000 tents. And, probably on any given weekend, the most popular camping weekend of all year, there's probably 5,000 of those in use, maybe max, maybe less. And so the idea was you have all this sort of excess stuff in cities. What would happen if you could sort of pool the storage of those things and then give people shared access to it? And so we started with a storage, the first app, the sort of first version of the app was a storage app, because we wanted to aggregate supply. And so the idea was, let's get a bunch of people to give us their stuff that we can store. We charged per item. So the idea there was that if we had some marginal costs on a per item basis, it wasn't based on cubic feet, then people would be more likely to give us things of value. And so if you had to pay 50 cents or $1 for everything that you stored, you're not going to give us a bunch of, dirty old shirts. You're probably more likely to give us a bike, tent, camping chairs, a camping stove, a surfboard, whatever it might be. And so that worked pretty well. We got to $1 million in ARR, like relatively quickly, I don't know, like 14 months or something. And then we turned on the marketplace where people could rent stuff. And so then all of a sudden you could rent anything you owned in Omni, you could opt in to the supply side of the marketplace. You could also deposit new things if you wanted to supply things. We actually had people that were literally buying things professionally to rent out on Omni, like starting little sort of like micro stores there. And then if you wanted, you didn't have to have anything in Omni to operate on the demand side. You could just participate on the demand side, just download the app and or go to the website. What we've learned was that the quality control on secondhand rental items is extremely hard. And so the people that did the best and the items that were the best were the people that were sort of doing this professionally, and they were like actually buying things and putting them in Omni to rent out. And what they would buy is like very, very durable goods. And so they would buy like a bike that was like meant to be, rent out, not like a $90 bike that they bought at Walmart. They would buy like a surfboard, not like a really nice surfboard that they might use personally 5 times a year, but they'd actually buy a surfboard that was like meant to be sort of operated at like a rental surf shop. And those things worked really well. The problem for the other stuff is that there's natural wear and tear that happens when people use items. And so one of the really tough challenges was that this natural wear and tear, the owners of the items had this sort of psychological standard that that the item should come back to them in the same condition that they put it in an Omni. And what's fascinating actually is like, this actually applied to storage as well. And so we had all these funny stories where early on, we were storing bikes, and someone would put their bike in Omni for like 6 months, and then they would get it returned, and they would be furious that it had flat tires. And they're like, "Well, when I put it in, it had the tires were full of air," and there was no like recognition, like, yeah, it's been sitting in a warehouse for 6 months. Like tires don't just infinitely hold air. But we realized, like psychologically, they viewed Omni as like this sort of like time freeze on their items, and we needed to return things in the exact same condition. So we built a whole system where like every single bike that went out the door to return to an owner, like we inflated the tires, we washed it down, we made it like look super clean. And these are things that we had to learn the hard way. And so imagine that magnified towards people renting your items, where actually like real damage can happen, and they can ding them up, or they can lose them, or they can get stolen, or all sorts of different things. And so we realized that it was going to be extremely difficult to sort of reach this like platonic ideal that we had of sort of using people's excess stuff to as the supply side of this marketplace, just because of the way that people viewed their items psychologically. And so we ended up sort of shifting the supply side of the marketplace to actual retail locations and that already rented things. And so we would allow basically places that were like a bike shop, for example, or a surf shop, or like someplace that rented out like electronics equipment or speakers or things like that, to list their stuff on Omni. And the reason why we did this was because of two things. One, it helped dramatically with the logistics. So now we had all these effectively like drop points all over the city where we didn't have to go deliver all the items as we were doing previously, which is very expensive. And even with a like fairly optimized like logistics product and logistics network, we were still at like $12, $13 in cost per delivery. And you can really only pass on like $5 to $6 that cost to the consumer with like an Amazon Prime Now world where people just assume like delivery should be free. And so it's very hard to make those economics work. And so it's much more palatable to have people actually picking up and dropping off at these various retail locations. And so we rolled that out, and that actually worked a little bit better. But sort of in that same horizon, we decided to sell the company sort of right after we rolled that out. And so we never got to see it sort of like whether that would have fully worked. But yeah, it was extremely fun, extremely brutal. 4 years, and learned a lot, but it was one of those things that I still feel very strongly like someone will figure it out and someone will make it work. But there's some real psychological hurdles that you have to overcome for people.